It's December 2005, and Lachlan Murdoch is sitting in a car outside News Corporation's Manhattan headquarters. He's just resigned, walked away from one of the most powerful media empires on the planet, a company his father built from a single Adelaide newspaper into a global colossus. He's 34 years old. He was supposed to be the heir. And right now, in this moment, he is nothing. Not the crown prince, not the CEO in waiting. Just a guy in the back of a town car, watching the building shrink in the rear window, wondering if he just made the biggest mistake of his life or the only move that could save him. His father didn't chase after him. His brother James is still inside, already circling the empty chair. And Lachlan Murdoch has to sit with a question that would haunt him for nearly 2 decades. Can you walk away from a dynasty and still end up on the throne? If that sounds like a scene from HBO's Succession, that's because the people who made that show were watching families exactly like the Murdochs tear themselves apart in real time. But here's the thing, the fiction had to tone it down. Reality was worse. To understand Lachlan's story, you have to understand Rupert. Keith. Rupert Murdoch inherited a single newspaper in Adelaide, Australia, in 1952. By the time Lachlan was born in 1971, Rupert had already begun assembling an empire that would eventually include Fox News, the Wall Street Journal, 20th Century Fox, Sky Broadcasting, and newspapers on 3 continents. Rupert Murdoch didn't just build a company, he built a kingdom. And like every kingdom, the question was always the same: who gets it when the king dies? Rupert had 6 children across 3 marriages, but the succession race for decades really came down to 2. Lachlan and James. Lachlan was the eldest son of Rupert's second marriage, to Anna Torv. He was groomed early. He was sent to work at newspaper mastheads in his 20s, given authority over Australian operations, brought into the inner circle. He was the one sitting next to Rupert at board meetings, absorbing the old man's ruthlessness like a second language. James, 2 years younger, was the wild card. Dropped out of Harvard, started a hip-hop record label, seemed for a while like he wanted nothing to do with the family business. In Succession, you see this dynamic split across 4 characters. Kendall is the tortured heir who desperately wants approval. Roman is the irreverent one, masking deep insecurity. Shiv is the outsider who thinks she's above the game until she's in it. Connor is the one nobody takes seriously. But in real life, these archetypes collapse into just 2 brothers. And the drama is somehow more concentrated for it. Jesse Armstrong, the creator of Succession, has always been cagey about direct inspirations, but nobody in media was fooled. Logan Roy is an amalgamation, sure. There's Murdoch in there, but also Sumner Redstone, Robert Maxwell, Conrad Black. The show's genius was taking the documented patterns of real media dynasty collapses and distilling them into 4 seasons of prestige television. But Succession made a crucial creative choice. Logan Roy dies, the patriarch exits, and the children are forced to reckon with what they actually are without him. In real life, Rupert Murdoch, at 93 years old as of this recording, is still alive, still scheming, still restructuring the family trust to try to guarantee his preferred outcome survives his death. The king refuses to leave the chessboard, and that makes the real story not just messier but fundamentally more tragic. Because unlike the Roy children, the Murdoch children have spent decades performing for an audience of one who keeps changing the rules. When Lachlan walked away in 2005, the proximate cause was a power struggle with Roger Ailes and other News Corp executives who had Rupert's ear. Lachlan felt undermined, outflanked by people who weren't even family. So he left, moved to Sydney, started his own investment ventures, and for a while James ascended. James became the heir apparent, running operations in Asia, then taking over Sky News in the UK. And then James's world imploded. In 2011, the news of the world phone hacking scandal detonated like a bomb under the Murdoch empire. Journalists at the Murdoch-owned British tabloid had been hacking into the voicemails of celebrities, politicians, and, most devastatingly, a murdered 13-year-old girl named Millie Dowler. The public outrage was volcanic. Parliament hauled the Murdochs in for testimony. Rupert got a pie thrown in his face. The News of the World, a newspaper that had been publishing since 1843, was shut down in a single week. James Murdoch was the executive in charge. Whether he knew the full extent of the hacking or not became the central question. Investigations dragged on. His credibility was shredded. In succession, a comparable scandal emerges with the cruise ship cover-ups, where the company's systemic abuses become a public relations and legal nightmare. The Roy children try to manage the fallout politically, strategically, selfishly. The Murdochs did the same, but the consequences were real. Real people were violated, real journalists went to prison, and James Murdoch's path to the throne was effectively destroyed. This is where the real story diverges from the show in ways that are almost too convenient for narrative. Because while James was burning in London, Lachlan was quietly rebuilding in Sydney. The exile became the advantage. He wasn't tainted by the scandal, he hadn't been in the room. And Rupert, who always favoured Lachlan temperamentally, began pulling his eldest son back into the fold. Now, the Murdochs weren't the only media dynasty disintegrating in public during this era. And to really understand how mild Succession's fiction actually is, you need to look at Sumner Redstone. Redstone controlled Viacom and CBS, a combined empire worth tens of billions of dollars. By his late 80s, he was in severe cognitive and physical decline, barely able to speak or eat solid food. And the people around him were engaged in a power struggle that makes the Roy siblings look like amateurs. His daughter Shari, long estranged, maneuvered back into his life and legal affairs. His live-in companions, including a woman named Manuela Herzer, were written in and out of his trust and advance healthcare directive in a revolving door of legal documents. Lawsuits alleged that Redstone was being manipulated by whoever had physical access to him on any given day. Depositions described a man who communicated through an iPad speech app, whose expressed wishes changed depending on who was sitting beside him. Sumner Redstone was, in a very real sense, a living Logan Roy, a titan whose body failed before his grip on power did, surrounded by people whose loyalty was entirely conditional. When he finally died in 2020 at 97, the legal battles continued. Shari took control, but the wreckage was extraordinary. Succession captured the emotional architecture of these stories, the desperation of children who've been made to compete for love that was always conditional. The way that wealth on this scale doesn't free a family but imprisons it in a game with no clean exit. But the show, by necessity, compressed decades into 4 seasons and gave its audience the catharsis of resolution. The Roy's story ended. The Murdoch's story hasn't. In September 2023, Rupert Murdoch finally stepped down as chairman of Fox Corporation and News Corp. Lachlan was named sole chairman of both entities. After 18 years, the exile had come home and taken the throne. But almost immediately, Rupert made another move. He went to a Nevada court to try to alter the irrevocable family trust, concentrating control in Lachlan's hands alone, stripping the equal voting power held by James, Elizabeth, and Prudence. The other siblings fought back. A probate commissioner ruled against Rupert in late 2024, finding that he had acted in bad faith. Think about that for a moment. A 93-year-old man, having already handed over operational control, was still trying to rig the game from beyond the corporate grave. Logan Roy's final play in Succession was to sell the company out from under his children entirely. Rupert's final play was to rewrite the rules of inheritance itself. Both moves carry the same message: I built this, and none of you deserve it. But if someone must have it, it will be the one I choose, not the one you choose among yourselves. Lachlan Murdoch is now running a global media empire, but he's running it under a legal cloud, with siblings who may never speak to him warmly again, inheriting a Fox News that is post-Trump, post-defamation lawsuit, and facing an entirely transformed media landscape. He got the crown. The question is whether the kingdom is still worth having. So Succession was never really fiction. It was a pressure-cooked distillation of what happens when men who conquer the world forget that their children are people and not chess pieces. Lachlan Murdoch sat in that car in 2005 and drove away from everything. And somehow that's the move that brought him back to the center of it all. Whether that's a victory or a curse depends on how the next chapter plays out. And that chapter is still being written in courtrooms and boardrooms right now. But here's something that might keep you up tonight. There's another media dynasty story that almost nobody talks about. One involving a billionaire whose death was ruled a suicide, whose body was found floating in the Atlantic Ocean, and whose empire collapsed within weeks, leaving billions in stolen pension funds and a trail of unanswered questions across 3 continents. His name was Robert Maxwell, and his daughter Ghislaine's story would take an even darker turn decades later. That story is coming. If you want to be here when it drops, subscribe to the channel and stick around, because the real history behind the headlines is always stranger than anything a writer's room could invent.